on the line is Matt Walsh, nationally recognized writer, blogger, podcaster, and speaker. Of course, he hosts the Matt Walsh Show here at the Daily Wire. He has a brand new book, Church of Cowards, A Wake-Up Call to Complacent Christians, is out yesterday and surging up the charts. Matt, good to talk to you, sir.
Hey, Ben. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's going pretty well. So let's talk about the new book. Obviously, one of the things that we are watching in the United States is a radical rise in the number of people who have declared themselves non-believing. That is the largest group of people in the Democratic Party at this point. So what exactly has happened to church in the United States? Because as church wanes, obviously secularism rises, and with it, this seeming call for more government intervention.
So I think when Ben says that we're seeing a huge number of people leaving the church, he's absolutely correct. That rate is also increasing. So this is a Gallup poll from March of this year, and it's showing how the rate of U.S. church membership finally fell below 50% last year in 2020. And when he says that the majority of atheists are likely to vote Democrat, I think that that's also valid. If the root of your beliefs are based on religion and faith, then you're more likely to have conservative values when it comes to reproductive rights, women's rights, LGBT issues, dying with dignity, and other social topics. However, when he says that this increase in the non-religious populace means an increase in government interventionism, the implication being that atheists want more government intervention, I'm not sure if I agree. So according to Pew Research, the difference between how much religious and non-religious people in the US care about government intervention seems fairly negligible. And this graph actually seems to say that Jewish people care more. Touché, Ben. So you have the percent of adults who would rather have smaller government and fewer services. And it's actually more, it's a higher percentage for the religious people than Jewish. So this video was uploaded back in February 2020. Now, I think that that's relevant because I was wondering, like, what topics in the news were related to government interventionism and atheism back in February 2020? Well, here's one. The Supreme Court ruled that a huge concrete cross can stay on public land in suburban Washington, rejecting the claim that its presence is an unconstitutional government endorsement of religion. By a 7-2 vote, the court said that such monuments are essentially historic, not religious, a ruling that potentially extended protections to hundreds of similar tributes nationwide. Now, this is an article written by someone from the American Humanist Association. So it was the American Humanist Association that were the ones fighting for the separation of church and state, and thought that they actually won after getting a ruling calling the cross a religious monument, which it obviously is. And you can see here that $100,000 in taxpayer money was spent on renovations to this cross. So it's obvious to me that the cross is a symbol. It's obvious to me that the cross is a symbol of the entire Christian religion. The cross is a representation of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, his death, and his resurrection. It is the singular most important event in the entire biblical canon. That's why you often see Christians wearing cross necklaces, and you can't walk into a church without seeing a cross front and center. But it wasn't until the government intervened and said that the Supreme Court said that this giant cross actually isn't a religious monument. The American Humanist Association thought that they had won the ruling until the government intervened. Apparently, their justification is because it's a war memorial. This overrules the fact that it's clearly religious iconography. But this ignores the fact that it's only honoring the faith of Christian veterans who were buried at this particular cemetery. Now, the reason that I mentioned the date of this Daily Wire upload is that when I first saw this video, I thought there's no way that Ben could be saying this with the current news cycle, saying that it's atheists who want more government intervention and not religious people. And the news story that I was referring to was citing our creator. Texas Governor Bill signs bill Citing our creator, Texas governor signs bill effectively banning abortions. This is a bleak time for women's reproductive rights in America after Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed into law Wednesday an abortion bill, a heartbeat ban that would forbid the procedure after a heartbeat can be detected. So, the Supreme Court upheld this ruling for this idiotic heartbeat bill passed by the governor of my state, which is Texas, Greg Abbott. I mean, what an embarrassment. This bill blatantly tries to impose religious morals onto national law. At least that's the thin veneer that is used to try and hide the real purpose, even though that in itself is totally unconstitutional. It's simply to erode the rights of people who can get pregnant and damage reproductive health care. The religious right is still just trying to chip away at Roe v. Wade any way that they can. As for government intervention, I can't think of a more personal and private issue than reproductive health care and the issue of abortion. So I find it funny when people like Ben Shapiro, who are always saying that they're championing the force of small government, yet they're the ones who want the government to intervene in the most personal issue there is, which is bodily autonomy. The bill itself is very misleading. The name references the point in time when a embryo's cardiac activity can first be detected by an ultrasound, which under the new law triggers a block on an abortion. But medical and reproductive health experts say the reference to a heartbeat at that stage of a pregnancy is medically inaccurate, as an embryo does not have a developed heart at 6 weeks gestation. Abortions at or after 21 weeks are uncommon and represent 1% of all abortions in the US. Typically, these procedures cost well over $1,000, excluding the cost of travel and lost wages. They normally require treatment over multiple days and are only performed by a subset of all abortion providers. So, making this harder is just not something that I think the government should be involved in, and I'm an atheist.
More liberalism. What's happened to church in the United States?
Yeah, I think it's worse. I think it's worse even than the statistics tell us, because if the stats tell us that there are, I don't know, 80% Christians or something like that, and that number is trending downwards, but how many of them are actually fully believing? If you look at the statistics, the number of Christians who can affirm even the most basic doctrinal points of Christianity, that number is much lower than the 80% figure. I think what's happening is that Christians, are religious people in general, I think, are sort of drifting on the tide of the culture and going wherever the culture takes them. That's the complacency I talk about in the book. I think that's the great challenge that we face as a church, is just this willingness, or an unwillingness really, to resist the tide of the culture, and this idea that we have to just go along with whatever the culture says. And of course, the culture says we should be secular, irreligious, faithless, and that's what's happening.
So why exactly is that happening? So that I was always informed, as a religious person myself, I was always informed that the value in religion always lay in sort of its adherence to eternal values and standing up for principles. And yet I agree with you. I mean, I see it in my own religious community, this attempt to sort of give away those eternal values in favor of some pizza and guitar. This belief that religion is somehow going to earn new converts and fill the pews simply by giving into the prevailing winds of social culture. You see this in the Democratic Party with Pete Buttigieg, who cites the Bible to support pro-abortion positions, for example.
What are these eternal values, Ben? Please list them. And I like how it's okay for politicians to cite the Bible when it's a position that you support, Ben, but it's not okay otherwise. That's very interesting.
Why have so many churches acquiesced in this?
Yeah, I think there are many reasons for it that we could point to. Maybe the fundamental issue is that we focus only on the here and now, and the focus has been in the church generally, has been making your life more comfortable. I mean, the most odious versions of that, of course, things like the prosperity gospel and Joel Osteen, and that's the most explicit version. But you find versions of that anywhere you go, it seems like, where it's about getting along with the culture and making friends. And Even the virtues, so-called virtues that are promoted, being welcoming, being tolerant, being accepting, which of course aren't virtues at all, but that's all about just getting along with people. And it's the focus is always, it's not about the eternal things. It's about the here and now.
How are those not virtues? And you two wonder why people are leaving the church. It's because society is leaving you behind, because you refuse to be tolerant of LGBT people, of gender nonconforming people. You refuse to fight for women's rights, and you don't want to be welcoming to people who are different than yourselves. And if you're not welcoming, people are going to leave. It's really as simple as that.
So, how do we make religious people less complacent? Because it seems like the easiest way to move along in our culture, Matt, is to be complacent, is to see tolerance as the highest possible value. Whatever floats your boat seems to be the ethic of the day. And of course, here we're talking about the culture. We're not even talking about what government ought to be doing. We're talking about just what you as a person believe is sinful and not sinful. How do we fight back against that when the easiest path to being treated well in today's society is indeed to give up some of those values or to at least be quiet about those values for the sake of popularity?
I think we have to get back to, first of all, basic questions like what is our purpose? Why do we exist? What's the purpose of living? I mean, these are the questions that you're supposed to go to religion for, and religion is supposed to provide an answer for. The questions that religion used to not be afraid to answer, but recently has been. So there needs to be a renewed focus on that, an understanding of what our purpose is, and that's going to involve things like, I think, in the church, calling congregants to sacrifice. There needs to be a moral message. We can't be afraid of the moral message. That's the interesting thing, seems to me, about guys like Bernie Sanders. Why does he resonate so much? Part of the reason is, yeah, the entitlement mentality, the stupid millennials, so on and so forth. Like that's part of it. But the other part of it is that he has a moral message. His message is all about moral outrage and all the evil things and terrible things that are happening in the culture. I disagree with his prescriptions to remedy those evils, but at least he has a moral message. Whereas I think for among conservatives and Christians, and we've become afraid of making that moral point.
So,
Wow, so I guess you're saying Bernie voters are entitled stupid millennials? Well, I do agree with his prescriptions to fix many of the problems that we have in the United States. And you have to wonder, had Bernie Sanders won the election and been able to pass Medicare for all, I wonder if that would have come in handy right about now during a global pandemic with 4 million deaths. And what's this about Christians being afraid to moralize? That's all you guys do is claim that you have the moral high ground because of your holy book, saying that atheists are wrong, they can't tell right from wrong, and that they have to borrow from Christian morals. Well, if Kent Hovind and his recent actions are anything to go by, I don't think Christians are always the moral example to follow.
what do you think is the moral message of Christianity that needs to be heard in today's culture? Because you're talking to a lot of people who read this book are going to be people who are already committed Christians, already committed religious people. But let's say you're talking to somebody secular. Why should they become a committed religious person as opposed to simply sort of drifting along on the waves here?
I think one of the most important moral messages is about the dignity of the human person. That we are human beings, have value, that we matter, we have dignity, and you don't find that in the broader culture. What you find in the culture, that the things that are celebrated in the culture are the things that degrade the human person. And nobody's really happy with that, and no one feels happy. And I think that's why there's so much depression and drug use and everything, and the suicide epidemic. All these things are wrapped up in it. So I think that can obviously appeal to people. That's a message that can appeal to someone, even who's not religious.
So, do you have anything to back up what you're saying here? Because, in my opinion, what causes young people to have suicidal thoughts and actually commit suicide is feelings of rejection due to their religious faith. I'm talking specifically about LGBT people. Young LGBT people who are kicked out on the streets when their parents find out that they are LGBT, and I can back up my claim. So, according to a study by the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, 5% of heterosexual youth reported attempting suicide in their lifetimes, compared to 20% of bisexual youth, 17% of questioning youth, and 14% of gay or lesbian youth. Notably, the study authors found that religion may have acted as a protective factor against suicide attempts among heterosexual youth. Each increase in the level of importance of religion among straight youth was associated with a 17% reduction in recent suicide attempts. Religion-based services for mental health and suicide prevention may not benefit gay, lesbian, bisexual, or questioning individuals. So this was the conclusion that the study found. They said religion-based service providers should actively assure that their services are open and supportive of gay/lesbian, bisexual, or questioning individuals. So that sounds like the exact opposite of what you guys are suggesting. So, Church of Cowards? More like Video of Cowards.
Got him! Got him!